You ever have a thought cross your mind and suddenly think, wait, did I actually believe that? Or did someone put that in my head? It happens quietly. You're going about your day, feeling fine, and then, boom, your mood flips, anxiety kicks in, and you're suddenly worrying about things that never crossed your mind 5 minutes ago. And here's the strangest part. When you stop and really listen to these thoughts, like really pause and pay attention, you realize they sound suspiciously like someone else. Maybe it's your parents, repeating their fears about money. Maybe it's that old friend, always warning you about getting hurt again. Maybe it's something you picked up from someone online, scrolling mindlessly at midnight. These aren't your original fears, doubts, or anxieties. They're borrowed, handed down, quietly installed when you weren't paying attention, and yet you treat them like gospel. You live according to these borrowed worries, tiptoeing around possibilities because you're listening to someone else's warnings. You shrink yourself down because of someone else's judgments. You second-guess your own instincts because someone else once told you that your instincts weren't enough. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Nobody says out loud clearly enough. Half the noise in your head doesn't even belong to you. It's like living your life to someone else's playlist, songs you didn't choose, lyrics you don't like, and yet you've memorized every single word. But the second you see this clearly, the moment you catch it, you have the chance to change it. Not by wrestling with the thoughts, not by arguing back, but by understanding they were never yours in the first place. The anxiety about failing again, someone else's. The hesitation to speak up, someone else's. The voice saying you can't handle what's coming next, someone else's. And when you recognize this deeply, honestly, clearly, you finally stop feeding it. You stop giving your energy, your attention, your life to stories that aren't even yours. Instead, you start reclaiming your mind, one thought at a time, one quiet realization after another. And that's exactly what we're about to do. Clear away the borrowed noise so you can finally hear your own voice again. Not louder, just clearer. Because your own thoughts, they're still there, just waiting behind all the noise you never agreed to. And this is how you get them back. Here's how you catch those borrowed thoughts the second they start sneaking into your head. They always come dressed as your own voice, but they feel off. Think about it. You're going about your day, feeling good, feeling clear. Then suddenly something small triggers you. Someone's tone in a text, a passing comment at work, a silence after you shared something vulnerable. And immediately the thought pops in, they don't like you. You messed it up again. See, you can't trust anyone. But here's the thing. Most people never stop to ask themselves, does that thought even sound like you? Think about how often that voice feels meaner, sharper, colder than anything you'd actually say to yourself in a moment of clarity. Notice how automatic it is, like it's playing on a script someone else wrote, using words you'd never pick if you were truly in charge. That's how you know. Borrowed thoughts always feel a little disconnected. They don't sit well in your body. They tense your shoulders, tighten your stomach, speed your heartbeat. Not because they're true, but because deep down, your body recognizes something is off. Yet most people accept these thoughts at face value, assuming that if it popped up, it must be theirs. But when you stop and really look closer, you can trace these borrowed thoughts right back to their source. Maybe it's something your dad always said about money, that you have to be careful or you'll lose everything. So now every time you make a choice, his voice chimes in and pulls you back into scarcity. Maybe it's your old friend who always doubted your dreams. So now every time you start something new, their skepticism creeps in and drains your excitement before you even start. Or maybe it's the voice of someone you loved once, someone who left and whose words still linger, whispering, "You're hard to love," making you second guess every new connection you try to make. But here's the moment everything changes. The second you identify that voice as not yours, the moment you realize it's someone else's fear, someone else's insecurity, someone else's limitation, something powerful happens. You stop reacting automatically. you pause, you take a breath, and suddenly there's space. Not space to argue back, not space to rationalize or explain yourself, just space to clearly see the thought for what it is, an echo from a past that never belonged to you. And when you do this, when you pause instead of instantly believing the voice, it starts losing its power. Because borrowed thoughts only survive when you trust them without question. The moment you question, you break the spell. You realize you don't need to wrestle or resist. You don't need to shout them down or drown them out. You just let them pass, like cars driving by on the street outside your window. Loud, maybe distracting, but not yours to chase. And over time, the more you practice this, the more you catch these borrowed thoughts in real time, the quieter they become. They lose their grip, their power, their urgency. You stop acting on them. You stop shrinking because of them. You stop making your life smaller to fit beliefs you never agreed to carry. And slowly, steadily, something incredible happens. You start reclaiming the one thing you've always had, but rarely used. Your own voice. Not the borrowed one, not the fearful one, just yours. Calm, clear, unhurried. And this is exactly how you finally start living from a place that feels like you, not from a version someone else quietly installed. When your own voice starts leading, life doesn't dramatically snap into place overnight. Instead, it quietly starts reshaping itself around you. You notice it first in small ways, moments nobody else sees but you. You wake up one morning, and instead of instantly scrolling or replaying yesterday's stress, you pause, look around, and realize your mind is actually quiet. Not numb, not distracted, just quiet. You move slower. You breathe deeper. You don't rush to fill every silence because, for once, you don't feel threatened by it. Then the bigger things start shifting, almost effortlessly. You find yourself calmly saying no to invitations you'd normally guilt yourself into accepting. Not because you don't care about others, but because now, you finally care about yourself enough to be honest. You stop agreeing to plans just to keep people comfortable. You stop forcing laughter at jokes that never felt right. You stop trying to vibe with everyone because you realize it's okay to connect with fewer people if those connections are genuine. The more your own voice leads, the clearer your boundaries become. Not aggressive boundaries, just clear ones. Boundaries that say quietly but firmly, this is who I am, and this is how I choose to live. And at first, it feels strange, maybe even lonely. Because you're used to managing perceptions. You're used to softening your truth. You're used to chasing acceptance. But now you realize something powerful. When you stop adjusting your voice to fit the room starts adjusting itself around you. Some connections fade away, not with drama, just naturally. The friendships built on borrowed beliefs, borrowed jokes, borrowed lifestyles, they quietly drift. And you let them go, not out of anger, but out of recognition that they were never yours to keep. Meanwhile, new connections begin forming, not because you're trying harder, but because people finally see who you actually are. They're drawn to your calmness, your clarity, your quiet confidence that comes from no longer negotiating with yourself. You become magnetic in a subtle way. People notice your presence, not your performance. They sense something different. Something grounded, something authentic, and even your daily choices shift profoundly. You stop chasing goals that sound impressive, but leave you empty. You start making choices that actually nourish you, taking walks, spending quiet evenings alone, reading because you want to, not because you have to impress someone with how well-read you are. You move through your days without the anxiety that comes from constantly checking in with the borrowed noise in your mind. And most importantly, your self-trust deepens. Decisions you once agonized over become simpler. You don't panic when uncertainty comes. Instead, you trust your instincts, knowing they're finally your own. You realize clarity isn't some complicated puzzle you need to solve. It's what happens when your own voice finally gets the room to speak clearly. Life doesn't become perfect, but it becomes yours again. real, unhurried, present. The kind of life you've quietly wanted all along, but didn't realize was possible because you were listening to the wrong instructions. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about shedding what was never truly yours. And from that place, peace feels less like a destination and more like your baseline. You realize you never needed external permission to start living like this. You just needed to stop borrowing voices that drowned out your own. You finally realize your mind isn't a battlefield, it's home. And now, you get to live there fully. What's wild is how quickly everything external begins to reflect this internal shift. And not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped forcing yourself to be who you're not. People sense it. Even if they don't know what changed, they feel the difference. The way you move through a room now, calm, not rushed. The way you speak, slower, more direct, like you're not seeking approval with every word. The way you carry silence, like it's yours, not something you need to fill to make others comfortable. And without meaning to, you start breaking invisible rules that used to quietly govern your life. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop explaining every little choice just to feel valid. You stop shrinking around people with louder energy because you no longer think volume equals value. And slowly, without even noticing, you stop looking for mirrors in people's eyes. You don't need someone else's reaction to feel okay about yourself anymore. That's when the biggest change kicks in. You begin to feel real to yourself. Not the version you tried to perfect, not the personality you built to survive. Just you, untouched, unedited, present. And that feeling, that quiet inner, this is me, it's more addictive than approval, more energizing than external success, more grounding than any self-help strategy you've ever read. You become less reactive, not because you're trying to be stoic, but because less and less feels personal now. That passive-aggressive text doesn't hit the same. That sideways comment doesn't spin in your head for 3 days, because you're not filtering it through borrowed insecurity anymore. You're filtering it through clarity. You no longer need to defend yourself because there's nothing to defend. You're not playing a character. You're not protecting a persona. You're just showing up as you. And that is enough. This also means you're no longer afraid to grow out of things. You outgrow roles. You outgrow identities. You outgrow patterns that once felt like home, but now feel like cages. And rather than grieving those losses, you begin to thank them. They served you once, but they don't serve you anymore, and you finally know how to let go without guilt. Even your pain starts transforming, not disappearing, but evolving. Because when you're no longer clinging to borrowed stories, your pain becomes cleaner, sharper, yes, but also more honest. And in that honesty, you find movement, you find healing. The stuckness fades, the fog lifts, and what you're left with is space. Space to listen, space to choose, space to breathe again in your own mind. This is what people are really craving when they say they want peace. Not perfection, not silence, just space to finally feel what's real, without all the background noise that never belonged to them in the first place. And this space, it doesn't come from escaping the world. It comes from reclaiming your place in it as the person you were before everyone else's opinions took over. This is where your real life begins. Not when the chaos stops, but when you no longer let chaos decide who you are. Here's where things get even more real. Because once you stop living by borrowed thoughts, you start making choices that genuinely scare you, in the best way. Not because they're reckless, but because they're finally yours. And that's unfamiliar at first, terrifying even. You'll reach moments where you're about to make a decision, to walk away, to speak up, to start something, and your body flinches. Not because it's wrong, but because there's no one else's voice left to hide behind. You're not choosing based on fear anymore. You're not waiting for permission. You're not asking, will they understand? You're asking, Does this feel like mine? And when it does, you follow it. Even if it's messy, even if it's uncertain, even if nobody claps. That's the new compass. Not safety, but authenticity. You stop seeking comfort in predictability and start finding peace in alignment. Because you realize most of your suffering came from betraying yourself slowly. Every time you said yes when you meant no. Every time you played it small to be liked. Every time you kept quiet just to keep the peace. Now, you're no longer willing to pay that price. You'd rather risk discomfort than live a life built on compromise. And here's what's crazy. When you start living this way, even your memories change. You look back at certain chapters of your life, and it's like watching someone else. Not in a dissociative way, but with compassion. You see the version of you that was trying their best with the tools they had, but wasn't really there. Not fully. Because they were operating from a mind full of noise that didn't belong to them. And when that clicks, something shifts permanently. You stop trying to fix yourself because you realize you were never broken. You were just buried under expectations, comparisons, and voices that weren't yours. Now the only healing that matters is removing everything that isn't you. And that work, that quiet unlayering, it doesn't make you softer. It makes you solid, rooted, unshakable. You don't need to be loud. You don't need to prove your worth. You don't need to be understood by everyone. Because when you truly start thinking for yourself, when you begin to live as the clearest version of you, peace becomes your default. Not because life is easy, but because you're no longer carrying the extra weight of pretending. You're no longer performing sanity in a world that thrives on distraction. And that shift, that permanent internal click, becomes your new foundation, the place you make decisions from, the place you rest in, the place you return to when the world gets loud again. Because now you know, you don't need to silence the noise around you. You just need to stop mistaking it for your own. And maybe that's what this whole journey has been about. Not fixing yourself, not becoming someone new, but finally peeling away everything that was never yours to carry, so you could hear your own voice again, clearly, calmly, without the noise. Because once you know what's truly yours, you'll never chase borrowed thoughts again. So if this video helped you remember even a little bit of who you really are, comment the word mine. Let that be your quiet declaration, your moment of recognition, your signal to yourself that from here on out, you lead.